I think.
God. Do you know there was a time when I used to hate to get my picture taken? You might do this side. Yeah. Anytime you're narrative. Okay.
Let's, I think.
Here we go. You gotta go.
Okay. Thank you very much.
How you doing?
I'm Max Thielen, the President of the World Affairs Council, and it is my great privilege to welcome you to this very special afternoon. We have with us Representative Geraldine Ferraro, the Democratic Congresswoman from New York City. The World Affairs Council has had several very large and successful programs this year, but today's audience is the largest, exceeding in numbers the audiences for the President of France and the Premier of China. This is an appropriate tribute to Congresswoman Ferraro. I believe also it says something about the American public's concern for having more women in the highest positions in our society. The representative is the chair of the Democratic Party Platform Committee. An important part of that platform deals with foreign affairs, and that is what Representative Ferraro will discuss this afternoon. Between now and November, foreign policy issues will be front-page news. The two contending parties will discuss and debate these issues. We who are committed to strengthening the competence of Americans in dealing with foreign affairs welcome this introduction to that debate and the opportunity to learn of the Democratic Party's views on the key issues. Representative Ferraro is certain to be a national figure as the 1984 election campaign progresses. After playing an increasingly active role in local politics in Queens, she was elected to the Congress in 1978, and since that time has had important committee and special assignments, including membership on the House Budget Committee and Secretary of the House Democratic Caucus. She's taken a keen interest in foreign affairs as well, having recently visited the Middle East and Central America. We have all both read and heard recently that Representative Ferraro is one of the two leading women candidates for her party's nomination for Vice President. Representative, we in San Francisco are eager to know you better and to hear what the Democratic Party platform has to say about our nation's foreign policy. I want to thank you for coming at a very busy time for you and for agreeing to answer a few questions from the audience after your presentation. I might say that she is on a very tight schedule, and we will have to cut off the questions at a precise time of 6:45. Cards will be passed in which you can write out your questions, and they will be collected, and we will select such as we can from the large number that will be handed in. Thank you again, and I give you Representative Geraldine Ferraro.
Thank you, Max. Thank you. I was sitting here looking at the photographers, and I couldn't help but think that when I was a child, I used to hate to have my picture taken. And actually, up until about 7 or 8 years ago, never, ever liked to smile for a camera. I just hope they're around in another week and a half, folks. Let me thank you, Max, for that very, very kind introduction. It is a great pleasure for me to join with you and Peter Tarnoff and the World Affairs Council of Northern California. I'm honored that you've invited me to offer my reflections on the Democratic Party platform and my thoughts on the state and direction of American foreign policy. Next week in this city, as you know, the Democratic Party will meet to nominate candidates for president and vice president, and we will debate and approve a platform stating our party's principles. As chairwoman of the Platform Committee, I can tell you that no issue is more important to our party and to our country than the security of America in a world of turbulence and change. We are currently in the midst of an intense national debate over foreign policy. The debate is over how we can best serve both the security of this country and the cause of world peace. The essence of this national debate becomes clear if we consider President Reagan's pronouncement in his 1984 State of the Union address, and I quote, that America is back standing tall. Surveying America's current role in the world, and with the benefit of the testimony received by the Platform Committee from some of the best foreign policy minds and hundreds of American citizens across this country, I must ask this question in response to the President's buoyant proclamation of national resurgence. What is America back to, Mr. President, and what are we standing for? Now, I will not attempt to speculate on how President Reagan will answer that question over the next 4 months. I will, however, offer a Democratic answer. A Democratic administration would reaffirm the basic American values. We will stand for the principles of John F. Kennedy's long twilight struggle, a struggle against, quote, the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. We will resolutely oppose the tyranny of the Soviet Union, a state that strangles the people of Poland, carpet bombs the villages and mountains of Afghanistan, and stifles the religious freedom of its own people. It must be dealt only with great sureness and with a clear notion of what we hope and expect to achieve. But it must be dealt with. A Democratic president will revive the moribund aspects of arms control by agreeing to negotiate on the tradition of past presidents of both parties in the nuclear age. In the foreign policy area, the first responsibility of the next president will be to address the greatest failure of the current president. The next president must fully and personally be committed to reducing the danger of nuclear war that threatens the lives of every man, woman, and child on this planet. In our platform, we advocate a comprehensive, mutual, and verifiable freeze on the testing, production, and deployment of all nuclear weapons. The world does not get safer with new inventories of nuclear weapons and new technological schemes to hurl the arms race into space. It is time to reverse course. And the way to start is by imposing mutual and verifiable moratoria on the most dangerous new nuclear weapon systems on the Reagan shopping list. It is not just the acceleration of the arms race that is troubling. It is that so many of the new weapons present grave problems for arms controllers. There is no practical way to verify whether a submarine-launched cruise missile has a nuclear or a conventional tip. An even more serious problem is posed by the MX. With its 10 warheads, hard target kill capability, and based in vulnerable Minutemen silos, this missile experimental constitutes an invitation to the Soviets to attack first in time of crisis. It's time to start talking and stop building. It is time to stop building nuclear bargaining chips and start bargaining on a freeze and reductions of nuclear weapons. This one issue, to me, makes the 1984 contest worth fighting. This one issue makes a democratic victory imperative. A foreign policy based on American values must stress peaceful approaches to resolving conflicts. Only in old westerns do we shoot first and ask questions later. Now, when I hear the President give the MX missile a nickname, the Peacekeeper, that U.S. Marshals in the Old West used for the Colt 45, I am concerned that he does not understand the difference between those times and these. In the Democratic platform, we declare our commitment to seek peace in Central America by political means, not by escalating and widening the conflict. We will give moral and material support and not just lip service to the Contadora process. And I think so, too. In the Middle East, we will reaffirm that support for Israel is a moral issue. We will rescue Camp David from the scrap heap, and we will substitute that quest for peace for the policy of increasing arms shipments to the sworn enemies of Israel, our sole democratic ally in the region. To ship Stinger missiles to the terrorist-plagued Middle East is too close to throwing a lighted match into the world's gas tank. The Democratic Party has learned from Beirut and Camp David that the proper U.S. role in the Middle East is a diplomatic role. The Marines are a military force, not a diplomatic force. In both the Middle East and Central America, our party's commitment is to peace, not to the travesty of undeclared wars for uncertain causes. Through his own personal involvement in the Camp David process, Vice President Mondale has demonstrated the enormous opportunity that awaits leadership, which is dedicated to true peace and lasting security. Because of his own deep experience with issues of global security, Walter Mondale's foreign policy will be as professional as Ronald Reagan's foreign policy has been amateurish. A strong and ready military establishment is certainly key to a successful foreign policy, and our platform calls for strengthened conventional forces, improved readiness, and a prudent, balanced, and unquestioned nuclear deterrent force. To achieve maximum effectiveness, we would reorganize our military management and reform our military forces. The current four-year binge of waste, fraud, and conflict of interest has sapped the very military capability that hard-earned tax dollars and the sacrifice of hard-working Americans ought to provide. The platform acknowledges the sacrifices of U.S. taxpayers and asserts that America's strength today depends not only on ourselves, but on the collective power and purpose of our friendships and alliances around the world. That is why our platform insists that our allies must provide their own fair share of our collective defense, and that we, for our part, must use our power responsibly, consulting as partners with our allies. A Democratic administration will take full advantage of a network of alliances that is not available to the Soviet leaders, and that has been neglected by the Reagan administration. Finally, in all its endeavors, a Democratic administration will be a force for democracy and human rights. That is why in our platform we promise to stand up for democratic solidarity, for the dissidents and refuseniks of the Soviet Union and the free trade unionists of Poland, for the freedom fighters of Afghanistan and the campesinos of Guatemala, for the democratic forces in Chile and in the Philippines. And that is why we will terminate the Reagan administration's policy of so-called constructive engagement with the repressive, racist regime in South Africa. This is a positive, democratic platform. It will stand in stark contrast to the record of Ronald Reagan and the future he promises. Over the past 3.5 years, Ronald Reagan has presided over a major shift in American foreign policy. He's replaced the quest for nuclear arms control as a key component of national security with a dangerous dash for nuclear superiority. He has replaced the advancement of American values with support for right-wing dictators around the world. He has replaced traditional American respect for international law with presidential actions that flaunt the rule of law. If he were successful, some would excuse his actions on the altar of realpolitik and expediency. But the simple truth is that Ronald Reagan has not succeeded. Ronald Reagan does not have a single foreign policy success to his name. Where is his Camp David? Where is his Panama Canal Treaty? Where is his nuclear arms control agreement? Look around the world. Is the situation in Europe, in the Middle East, Africa, Central America any better than when he took office? Are we really more secure? Except by the standard of an administration that measures security solely in terms of the size of the defense budget, I would say we are not. $750 billion of defense spending later, the readiness of many of our military forces is less than in 1980. $750 billion worth later, there are thousands, I repeat, thousands more Soviet nuclear warheads aimed at targets in America than when Ronald Reagan took office in 1980. $750 billion later, the military buildup that was supposed to force the Soviets to negotiate has achieved nothing toward that objective. No reduction in Soviet missiles has been achieved. And remember, it has been reductions that we've been promised for the last 4 years. The tragedy is that no president had had such an opportunity to make this world a safer place. Elected with strong anti-communist credentials, Ronald Reagan could have sought to reduce tensions around the world, and he would have had the gratitude of generations of Americans. Elected with a national consensus for a strong defense, he could have prudently strengthened our forces where new strength was required, backed by unity at home and respect abroad. But unlike so many great presidents, Ronald Reagan did not grow in office. Reagan remained Reagan, prisoner of his past, and prisoner of his preconceptions. And if we let Reagan continue to be Reagan, we do so at our own peril. To be sure, he has changed his tone from time to time, and especially in this election year. Gone for now is the talk of nuclear demonstration shots and prevailing in nuclear war. Muted, but not entirely gone, is talk of evil empires. The record, however, is unchanging and puffed with the kind of political arrogance that would dare to honor an Anne Gorsuch Burford before re-election. Oh, pain. This administration promises no hope for change in 4 more years. This administration offers instead the promise of more arms, less arms control, more risks of war, fewer risks of peace. After the last 4 years of covert operations and military exercises in Central America, can any of us rule out the possibility that a re-elected Reagan administration will openly engage in combat next December? That is why a new American foreign policy is so important. The foreign policy of the greatest nation on earth ought to consist of something more than a president merely attempting to correct his own mistakes. Our standards ought to be higher and tougher. Look at the last 4 years. This administration has given us 5 arms control directors, 4 Middle East negotiators, 3 national security advisors, 2 secretaries of state, and I am not going to say a partridge in a pear tray. And a what me worry president at the White House. I think that a great nation deserves to have a policy with better managers on watch. I think that the challenges we face in the decade to come will demand something more than smooth talk. The American people are tired of diplomacy by megaphone and Hollywood arms control. Now, I believe, God, I'm feeling mean tonight. I believe that America represents something more than narrow national self-interest. I believe that our nation represents hope, hope for economic progress in a world where more than half the population is consumed by the simple struggle to stay alive, hope for freedom and justice, a distant dream to so many victims in so many nations, and hope for a world that is not increasingly threatened by weapons of mass destruction. Human hope is a peaceful ally. It is also extremely powerful. It is time to re-enlist it on our side. As Reverend Jesse Jackson has offered hope to the disenfranchised of America, our great nation can offer hope to the disenfranchised of the world. I believe that America must have a strong defense. It's preposterous that our party, which built our nuclear deterrent, which constructed the greatest alliance, NATO, in a peacetime history, should allow Republicans to redefine national security and call it their own. We can, we must, we will make national security and military security an issue in this election. This does not mean merely carping over the President's bloated defense budget with its weapons that do not work, and $9 wrenches bought for $9,000, and I think it's $46. This means positive recommendations to improve our security, to get maximum military power and capability from our defense dollars. It is not enough to define our defense policy by what we are against. We must state what we are for. We are for stronger conventional forces. We are for improved military readiness. We are for reform of our military strategy and leadership. This has been a major contribution of my colleague in the legislative branch, Senator Gary Hart. We are for steady and sustainable improvements so that our men and women in uniform can fight effectively and win if they are asked to do so in defense of our vital interests. I believe that we must be realistic about the Soviet Union. We will maintain our military strength as a deterrent to Soviet imperialism, but we recognize that our greatest advantage over the Soviets is our political and economic might and our commitment to improving the lives of people around the world. We recognize that the Soviets prey on poverty and sickness in the Third World and attempt to capture new client states by promising prosperity they are unable to deliver in their own country. Freedom and economic prosperity are American strengths, not Soviet ones. In the competition for the hearts and minds of the people of the Third World, we can't help but succeed if we talk less about the evils of communism and talk more about the evils of hunger and disease. Soviet leaders, time and again, demonstrate a continuing fear of change, threatened by the power of freedoms they seek to repress. Their power is military, and militarily it must be deterred. But I happen to believe that we also ought to be confident in the full range of America's strengths. The console of American capabilities must consist of more than a military button. Together with our allies, we have powers that the Soviet Union could never muster. It is time to use them effectively to advance the interest of America. For this reason, military power ought to be our own weapon of last resort. It will not solve the international debt crisis that threatens Americans' financial security at home, as well as the political security of nations we need as steady friends. It will not erase the fact that our government is on the verge of becoming the largest debtor in the world, and therefore even less able to help solve the global, economic, environmental, and developmental problems that threaten our long-term security as surely as Soviet divisions and cells of Cuban-sponsored guerrillas. Military power can defend the cause of freedom against aggression, but in this nuclear age, unlike the Soviet Union, America has the tools to advance the cause of freedom without risking the survival of this planet. We are confident in the immense political, economic, and spiritual power at our disposal, that these are the strengths that distinguish us from our adversaries. These are the strengths that give me confidence that our democratic century will not be cut short. But nothing we do anywhere else in this world or here at home will be sufficient if we do not immediately begin to reduce the risk of nuclear war. Confident in our power, no president should fear to meet with his Soviet counterpart to hammer out an agreement that serves the overriding interests we all share, the survival of this planet. Confident in our power, we can negotiate to limit the threat of limitless destruction, despite the behavior of the Soviet Union and other areas around the world. This is not a favor to the Soviet Union. It is cold, hard, national self-interest. We are talking about our survival, the survival of the United States and all humanity. As a mother and a Democrat, as an American and as a legislator, I would welcome an effort by this president to sit down with the Soviets and repair the damage of the 4 lost years. But the record of this administration reflects the lifelong attitude of this president and the opposition of his top advisors to arms control. Under these conditions, I must say that it is hard to have confidence that today's willingness to negotiate, paraded across the nation's front pages, is more than a momentary lull before the arms race proceeds with renewed vigor. The Democratic Party platform offers a strategy for America that responds to the fundamental dreams of the American people. Their dreams of a foreign policy that commits us to the hope that marks our nation from all others. Their dream of peace, the dream of which President Kennedy spoke so eloquently in his historic speech at American University. What kind of peace do I mean? What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you.
You're very fine. Would you like to sit down?
All right. Now that we got through my 20 minutes of prepared brilliance, we'll deal with questions and we'll see how many we can get before I have to run out.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Ferraro. We have a number of questions here, some of which have little sharp barbs in them. So
That's the easy ones.
You'll have to be prepared. You've probably heard most of them before. First, you blame the President for the failure to reach arms control agreements with the USSR. Do the Soviets share the blame for this impasse?
Sure. I have never said that it was something that we did on our own. What bothers me, and the Soviet has walked out of arms control negotiations in Vienna, and they have not, certainly since the 2007 incident, they have not sought to participate at all with us. And I have to tell you, I have a soft spot in my heart for that particular incident. I lost my doctor and his wife on that plane. But it was a tragic, tragic loss, but it just showed us what type of people the Soviets are. But we as a nation, nonetheless, I believe should make an effort to sit down and talk. And that's the one thing that this president has not done. He's been the first president, I think, something like 50 years, who has not sat down with a Soviet leader. There's no reason for that. We've got to start communication. We've got to start talking arms control agreements. We've got to start moving toward some sort of discussion. And that's what I fault this president for not making an attempt at least to go that first step.
In a different domain, do you favor the domestic content bills favored by the AFL-CIO and Mr. Mondale? If so, is this law not another step in the direction of much more protectionism?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I voted for domestic content as a member of Congress, and I'd probably do it again. And the reason I did was not because I think that's the way we should go as a nation in developing our trade posture with the rest of the world, but because we have an industry that was failing considerably and needed help. The type of help that domestic content, the threat of that bill got for our automobile industry was that the Japanese agreed to voluntary quotas on the import of their cars into our country. I have to tell you that I was in Japan last year in August and spent some time in fact, I was in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan talking to various trade representatives about their laws and why we couldn't, get some of our exports into their countries. And though we all participate in the GATT, and though we all don't like protectionism, there are lots of barriers that are put up by foreign countries, ways that they subsidize their problems, which make our people here unable to compete. And so we did have a good deal of discussion, and I and the Congress have, as a participant in the Trade Task Force, have attempted to see other ways besides domestic content to address the problem. I have to tell you that our platform does not talk about domestic content specifically. One of the nice things about the platform was that we didn't mention any specific legislation at all. What we did was we set forth the policy and principles and goals of the Democratic Party, and what we said is, you members of Congress and senators, when you go back to Washington in January, you write the legislation that's going to make you fulfill on the promises that you've made to the American people in this platform. So we do deal with the concept of domestic content, but we say that that is only one piece, that what we have to do is move out and make sure that the export ability of our firms in this country is made accessible to them with other countries. So I do support it. It did not pass in the House, and it did not pass in the Senate. It is not law, but I think it was sufficient in order to get, in this instance, the Japanese to put a voluntary quota on their products.
What is your stance on Senator Hart's resolution put before the Platform Committee that the Democratic Party should state its opposition to the deployment of U.S. troops in any war in the Persian Gulf?
I was, as you know, chair of the Platform Committee. I had no vote on the Platform Committee. You're really in a strange situation. You go all over the place ordering 184 people for 4 months, and then when it comes to voting on the platform, you don't have a vote. So I did not have the ability to vote on Senator Hart's resolution, but I would have voted against it. He has a minority plank, which he is submitting to the convention next week. It will be on Tuesday, kind of early in the afternoon, about 2 or 3 o'clock, and they will debate that particular plank. What he does is he indicates, I can read you the minority report. I'll find it. Talk or do something while I find it, will you, for just a minute? Okay. Oh, here. It's Minority Report number 5, and what he does is he sets forth a very specific way that they would not hazard American lives or engage in unilateral military involvement where our objectives are not clear, and he sets forth certain criteria. The only problem that I have with it is that you have a situation, as we do currently in the Persian Gulf. It is not a situation where only oil interests are at stake. There are other pieces at stake. If Iran were to overthrow the Iraqis, what would that mean for the United States? What would that mean as the fundamentalism that is currently part of the entire Iran regime's goal and plan were to spread further through that area of the world? What would that mean to us? What would it mean to the United States if Iran were to fall to Iraq? What would happen as the Soviet Union perhaps moved into that area of the world with greater ability, because there is not a country separating it from those who are friends? I think there are other reasons for involvement in the Persian Gulf. I think there are other ways to involve in the Persian Gulf. I am not suggesting that we do that, but I am suggesting that if you eliminate totally our ability to move in at all by the language set forth by Senator Hart in the minority plank that we're promising something we're not going to deliver on, because if an emergency arises and our interests are at stake, we're going to move in either through sea or land, and we're going to protect lives and our people. So that the minority plank, I think, is almost confining as far as Democrats are concerned. I don't think we should restrict the ability of our president to make a determination on situations such as occurs in the Persian Gulf and the Middle East.
Now, if I may, a question that's in an area that I believe everyone is waiting to hear you comment on. Why is there so much talk about a woman vice presidential candidate?
And no action.
And then I said there were some stingers. In this enlightened age, should we not be more concerned about the candidate's qualifications rather than gender?
Who's the nasty person who wrote that? Who? Well, I think what you have to do is look at it this way. I think that's really terrific, saying in this enlightened age, shouldn't we be more concerned about the candidate's qualifications rather than gender? Who's kidding who? Who's kidding who? Hey, you know. I mean, I should do a Joan Rivers here and say, can we talk? I want to tell you something. I'm one of those people who, you know, when I applied for jobs, and I now have to give away my age, but I do that all the time anyway, you do when you're in national. A reporter asked my mother her age. She got so insulted. But you know, she tells me I'm a big mouth. In 1960, I graduated law school, and it was not easy to do. I was teaching during the day in the New York City public school system, going to law school at night. Graduated law school in 1960, went down looking for a job. And if there are any women in this age who are in the same category, you don't have to admit it, same age category, you don't have to admit it. But just think back to 1960 when we tried to go get a job. And we went down, and you applied for jobs, and I applied at one of the most prestigious Wall Street law firms because I was a good student. I had worked hard, and I was entitled, right? I go through 5 job interviews. And at the 5th job interview, and this was not all the same day, you know, they drag you back and forth, kind of like I'm doing now. There I go again, right? You know, 5 job interviews, and I go running back and forth, and the 5th job interview, after it's all over, the guy says to me, at one of these major Wall Street law firms, gee, I'm terribly sorry, you're wonderful, you're terrific, but we're not hiring any women this year. Yeah, they excluded because of gender. Now, I have to tell you something. Someone said to me, don't you feel badly about all this stuff, the attention you're getting, and, you know, would you get it if you were not female? I don't feel the least bit badly about it. Not at all. Not at all. I said to this person, let me ask you, do you think that guy who got that job for me 24 years ago has walked around saying, oh my God, I shouldn't have taken the job, I should have gone to a woman, she was so qualified? He pocketed his money for 24 years and I don't feel badly. I'm qualified. So is Dianne Feinstein, the finest mayor, one of the finest mayors. I happen to come from New York City, Mayor Koch would kill me. One of the finest mayors in this country, and Martha Lane Collins, the women to be considered are capable. And I'm delighted that there is no longer that big sign outside that door of the office for vice president that says, white male only need apply. It's our turn, folks. I may have just lost the job.
This question will test your diplomacy, but I guess it's good news. It may be bad news. It says, Cable News Network reported tonight that Walter Mondale has reduced his vice presidential nominee choices to 2, you and Gary Hart. Would you care to comment?
Why do I have to comment about that? I think it's terrific. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go outside, call up my husband and my mother. Make sure they heard. Do you have another one?
Thank you. We do. What will or should the Democratic Party do differently regarding human rights, and let's add, as related to international and world affairs?
Oh, I think what they've got to do is show that we are strong for human rights. You know, Jimmy Carter, the one thing about his administration was that nobody doubted from 1 minute where he was coming from. This administration talks about it, but really doesn't do anything about it at all. I spent time in Central America in January, spent 9 days. Now that I think about it, Secretary Schultz spent about 5 hours. Who's more qualified? I was in Nicaragua for several days. This is in that whole Central American area. We were in El Salvador. And I have to tell you, I'm pleased that President Duarte won the election in Salvador. I think if he is able to get control of the government, and that he will be a strong president. But I think that we have to apply pressure, which we did in the Congress, on aid to that country by saying that you're not going to get the aid unless you do something about improving the human rights situation down there. The reason we did it was, quite frankly, you go down there and you get the figures that we get, the American government gets, from El Salvador, and as you know, the administration so often was saying, oh, the human rights condition is improving. Well, it wasn't at all. When you got down there, what was happening was that the human rights figures that our embassy was transferring to Washington were figures that they had gotten from the newspaper. I said, so help me. Where did the newspaper get their figures? From the government. Now, if you talk to the people who are in the Catholic Church down there, they have their own human rights groups. If you check their figures against the newspaper figures, they're really quite different. That country, 30 to 40,000 by conservative estimates, have died. I think we as a nation have a responsibility. And our responsibility is to do more than talk about it. Our responsibility is not to support a military regime that does not have concern for these individuals. But I think it's not only in Central America. I mean, it's also, I was absolutely flabbergasted when I heard Vice President Bush toasting Mr. Marcos in the Philippines as a lover of democracy. You know, I mean, incredible. I got a slight shock over things like that. But I think that we have an obligation, you know, throughout the world, wherever we have the ability to point out human rights violation, to make sure that people do hear us and hear our voices. Just said we're doing fine. New Yorkers talk very fast, so we're in time.
We have a number of questions on the Middle East, and you've already commented briefly on that area, but perhaps this goes a little bit of depth. Please comment on the Iran-Iraqi war and the appropriateness of U.S. armed support of Saudi Arabia. Now, that may mean in relationship to Iran or Iraq, or it may mean in general. You can answer it any way you please.
Suppose I don't want to answer it. No, I'll answer it. I'm like kidding. I guess I commented a little bit on the Iran-Iraq war. Let me just talk a little bit about the appropriateness of sending stingers to that part of the world. And I did comment in my speech about it. Do you know what those weapons are like? They are mobile. You put them on your shoulder and you can just move around, and they really do. They take off and they can hit. I think the range is 3 miles. Can you imagine if a terrorist ever got a hold of one of those things? Do you know what Lebanon is like? Do you know what Saudi Arabia? You know what that part of the country, the world is like? It's dangerous, folks. I was there last year. It is dangerous. Sending that type of weapons to that part of the world, to me, is absolutely destabilizing. It also is not necessary. The AWACS are there. They're used, you know, to watch what's going on. That makes sense. The weapons, these Stinger weapons that we were sending, I don't believe make sense at all because, they can turn them on anyone, including on Israel. And I just think that that's totally unnecessary and does not lead to any sort of stability in that section of the world.
Another question in that same area. Are the Arabs only terrorists? Are there no moderate states that must be dealt with to protect us, to protect U.S. interests in the Middle East?
Sure. Whoever wrote this question didn't hear about the Camp David Accords. You know, Egypt. Egypt is an Arab state. It has indicated that it is willing to negotiate and to work with the State of Israel. And we supply a good deal of military. We supply weapons. We supply economic aid to Egypt. So we don't think all Arabs are terrorists. But what we do think is that if they're going to, Israel is our strongest and only democratic ally in that section of the world. It is important for our security, if not for the security of Israel, that it remains independent and free. We supply economic aid, we supply military aid, we supply weapons. We do the same thing for Egypt. If other countries would deal with the situation in that part of the world, would seek to deal peacefully with their neighbors, I have no problems with assisting them as a member of Congress. But, I don't think all Arabs are terrorists. I don't think they're the only terrorists. I do think that we have, certainly in Egypt, a close ally.
Shifting gears, does the Democratic platform endorse or criticize the United States invasion of Grenada? What is your opinion of this action?
Now that I think about it, I don't really recall that it says too much about Grenada other than the fact that we lost lives there and that we should not move in militarily as a first source of control. My immediate reaction to Grenada was horror, I have to tell you. And let me go back 2 days before that. Let me go back 6 months before that. I have a son who's 20 years old, and we had gone to the Middle East a year ago, April. We went, I had been invited to go by my Jewish community. I said no because I'm going to go with my family, and we went at our own expense. Government did not pay for it, folks. You did not pay for my trip. How do you like that? I get applause for that. But my husband and I and 2 of our 3 children went. And my son was 19 at the time. We went over and we went to Israel. I have to tell you, for a Catholic, it was absolutely mind-boggling because I got to see the Sea of Galilee. It was Easter. I got to do the Stations of the Cross. I went to Bethlehem. I did all those things. It was wonderful. I even went to, for those who were not Catholic, put up with me. We went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and they showed me a tree that was there 2,000 years ago, and my God, it was really incredible. We also went to a room where they supposedly had the Last Supper, and we had this old priest who was like 82 or 84. He takes all the public officials around, and I looked at him and I said, Father, could you tell me, did they allow women at the Passovers in biblical times? And he said, yes. And I said, well, then how come none were at the Last Supper? Now, for non-Catholics, all you see is Jesus and the apostles. And my husband said, oh, Jerry, leave him alone. Will you please stop that? But poor priest was devastated. I have to go back and see him. But in any event, we did. We were in Israel, and then I went to Beirut, and then we came home. And 2 weeks later, the embassy was bombed. And my son is at Middlebury College, and he called me up in last October, and said to me, one Sunday morning, 9:15, we were chatting. I was a little surprised the kid called me up at that early in the morning anyway, but he said, wasn't that terrible about the Marines? And I said, oh, John, there's snipers. They're going to be hit. It's a dangerous place. You saw the area. You know what's going on there. People are just, the warring factions are there. He said, no, I mean the bombing. And, impatient mother, I said, John, the bombing occurred 2 weeks after we left Beirut. You're just waking up? And he said, no, I mean the bombing of the barracks. Well, I had gone to sleep before it happened, and then he woke me up before I heard the news. And after a good deal of discussion, he said to me, Mom, are we going to war? And I said, John, I don't know. And then he said, what should I do? And I, like a good mother, I said, study and get good marks. 2 days later, 2 days later, Grenada occurred. And then Thursday night, John called me up, and I was down in Washington, and we spent another bit of time on the phone. I guess I feel about the military involvement throughout the world very strongly because I am a mother of a kid who is draft age. I think I'd feel as strongly even if you weren't, but there's that little piece of the personal. I spoke with the father of one of the students who was down there, and I asked him if the students were in danger. And the father said to me that his kid had come out the night before. He had flown out. They could have left, that they were not, that the kid's friends had told him that they were not afraid. The only thing they were afraid of was when they woke up and saw our people there, with their guns drawn. I watched those kids getting off the plane, kissing the ground. That kid's going to run for office someday. You know, television cameras are marvelous, and kids know how to do that. But if they were in danger, I would say go in and you take them out. But, you know, we went in with force to a little island which had less than 100,000 people on it, most of them women and children. I mean, what did we really go there to do? I guess my problem is, number one, was it really necessary? But number two, do we always have to go in with troops? Why can't we talk a little bit first? Can we not negotiate? As I said in my comments, we send our Marines in, and these are young, well-trained men. But we send them in instead of sending diplomats. And I think that that's part of our problem. It's our problem in Grenada. It's our problem in the Middle East. It's our problem in Central America, where we have 1,800 troops in Honduras. It's our problem when we're exercising covert, and I don't know who doesn't know about it, activity in Nicaragua. You know, that's my problem with Grenada and with anything else. Interesting thing on the polls. Grenada was one of those things where they said President Reagan was really, people loved it. Do you know what the polls show? The polls, if you broke them down according to gender, I'm telling you, you know the gender gap? The day of the invasion, ABC, I think it was, did a poll, and there was something like a 14 or a 15-point difference with how men and women viewed the invasion. On the Thursday before the president gave his speech, the gap was 64 men approved, 43% women approved, which means that we're smarter, right? But what ended up happening was that was where the gender gap really shows up. It shows up on war peace issues. It shows up on environmental issues. It shows up on economic issues. And hopefully, you know, the women in November, are you all going to get to the polls and vote? Okay. I want to thank you all for being so very, very hospitable. Please watch us on Tuesday, because we are going to present the platform to the nation. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Please, the Congresswoman is on a very tight schedule. Thank you, Congresswoman Ferraro, for your very thoughtful speech and your frank and direct answers to the questions. We don't know what the next week holds for you at the Democratic Convention, but I hope you will come back to San Francisco in one capacity or the other. The meeting is adjourned.